Sarah, my wife of nearly 2 decades, stepped out of Dale Peterson's jacked-up pickup, laughing, her hand linked with his. They moved toward the supermarket entrance, oblivious to my company car hidden in the shadows. A sharp, cold wave of nausea hit me, pinning me to the driver's seat. Dale paused, looked back, and smiled directly at my car. A knowing, arrogant curl of his lip. Hank's long day ends with a flat tire on his way home. He pulls into a supermarket parking lot to inspect the damage, finding a screw. Decides to retrieve sealant from home, but removing the screw worsens the leak. He temporarily reinflates the tire at a gas station, hoping to make it. The tire loses air again, forcing him into another parking lot. Without an air pump, he applies a green slime sealant, barely fixing the leak. A large, jacked-up pickup truck pulls alongside his car. Hank recognizes the truck as belonging to Dale Peterson, a colleague from Sarah's office. Sarah Jenkins, his wife, emerges from the passenger side, laughing with Dale, holding his hand. Hidden, Hank watches them enter the store, feeling completely dumbfounded. He recalls seeing Dale's truck at Sarah's workplace before, but never considered its significance. Puzzled by Sarah's absence from work, he waits. A growing dread in his stomach. They reappear with coffee. Dale assists Sarah into his truck. Hank discreetly follows them, his mind racing with disbelief. To his shock, they pull into his own driveway, and Dale parks the truck in his garage. The garage door closes, leaving Hank outside, numb with the horrifying realization. The last light of the day was pulling back from the highway, as Hank felt the soft thump in the steering wheel. He'd been driving for an hour and a half, the tail end of a sales call loop that had stretched too far north. Now, the unmistakable wobble of a tire losing air. He eased his worn company sedan, a dull silver Impala, into the first available parking lot, a brightly lit Kroger at the edge of town. He stepped out, the cool April air doing little to shake off the day's fatigue. The front passenger tire looked soft, a definite slump in its stance. Squatting down, he found the culprit, a fat Phillips head screw embedded deep in the tread. It sat there, mocking him with its shiny head, a tiny, immovable object against his long drive home. He considered the options. The spare was a donut, slow and inconvenient. He knew he had a can of tire sealant back at the house, a green, gooey substance he'd bought years ago and never used. It felt like the easier route. He made the decision right there. He'd pull the screw, spray the sealant, and be done with it. A quick fix. He twisted the screw out, a short hiss of air following its exit. The tire deflated faster now, the small puncture turning into a more determined leak. He swore under his breath, a quiet, guttural sound. He drove slowly, carefully, to a nearby gas station, paid $1 to use the air pump, and filled the tire back up. It held long enough for him to get moving again, the air rushing out with less urgency once the car was in motion. He was less than a mile down the road when the telltale pull started again. The steering wheel grew heavy, the car drifting subtly to the right. The Impala felt sluggish, like a tired beast. He found another parking lot, this one darker, emptier, behind a small strip mall. He pulled in, killed the engine, and slumped against the headrest. The tire was flat again. He could hear the faint whisper of escaping air. He located the green sealant can in the trunk, a thick, sticky liquid designed to plug small punctures. There was no air pump in this lot. He twisted the cap off the nozzle, jammed it onto the tire valve, and squeezed. The can emptied with a faint hiss, the green slime doing its work, slowly sealing the leak from the inside. He watched, waiting for the chemical to set, the silence of the lot pressing in on him. The tire firmed up. Just enough. It wasn't perfect, but it felt solid enough to get him the rest of the way home. Just as he was about to get back into the Impala, a monstrous black pickup truck, lifted high off the ground on oversized tires, rumbled into the lot. It pulled up slowly, directly alongside his car, the engine idling with a deep growl. The truck sat there for a moment, its darkened windows reflecting the distant streetlights. Hank felt a prickle of unease. Then the passenger door opened. He saw her first, a flash of her bright yellow spring jacket, then her face. Sarah. His wife of 18 years, Sarah Jenkins. She was laughing, her head thrown back, a sound that carried across the quiet lot, and then he saw the man, Dale Peterson. He knew Dale from Sarah's office, a mid-level manager in their regional sales department. Dale was holding Sarah's hand, a casual, familiar grip. They walked toward the store entrance, not the Kroger this time, but a small convenience market connected to a fast food joint. Hank sank deeper into his seat. The company Impala, a dark, unremarkable shape in the shadows. He watched them go, his mind blank, dumbfounded. The laughter still echoed in his ears. He remembered seeing Dale's black truck in Sarah's work parking lot a few times, early mornings, late evenings. Sarah would always say he was just working late, or catching an early start. He hadn't thought anything of it. Not really. It was just a truck. The convenience store light glowed, casting long shadows. He looked at his watch. It was past 6 o'clock. Sarah should have been home, or at least on her way. She had mentioned a late meeting, but not with Dale, and certainly not here. A cold, hard pit began to form in his stomach. He waited, his gaze fixed on the store's automatic doors. Minutes stretched, feeling like hours. They emerged, coffee cups in their hands, talking animatedly. Dale held the door for her, a small gesture of attentiveness. He helped her into the high cab of the pickup, his hand lingering for a moment on her arm. The truck engine coughed to life, its huge tires crunching on the gravel. Hank started his Impala, keeping the lights off, waiting until the pickup was backing out before he followed, maintaining a discreet distance. His hands were tight on the steering wheel, his knuckles white. His mind was a jumble of disconnected thoughts. The flat tire, the green slime, the long day, all forgotten. He focused only on the taillights of Dale's truck. They drove for 15 minutes, a route that grew increasingly familiar. A cold dread seeped into his bones. Then, Dale turned, into their street, into his street. Hank held his breath, watching as the massive black truck veered into his own driveway. The garage door, a beige panel he had painted himself last summer, opened with a soft electronic hum. Dale pulled the truck inside. The door descended, cutting off the view, sealing them in. Hank sat there, parked half a block away, watching the garage door. Stunned, the sickening implication, cold and undeniable, washed over him like a wave. Hank sits for half an hour, his tire problem forgotten, consumed by dread. After 2 hours, Sarah and Dale leave, Hank hiding his face as they pass by. He notes the early time, 2:30 p.m., Sarah usually arriving home at 5 p.m. Hank feels compelled to enter the house, to search for evidence. He worries about picking up Grace from school at 4 p.m., and what he'll say. Entering his home, he's met by an unsettling silence, broken only by minor sounds. He checks the ground floor, finding everything seemingly in place, yet the atmosphere feels heavy. Venturing upstairs, he discovers the bed has fresh sheets, a crushing and undeniable detail. Hank slides down against the wall, numb, the clear explanation too painful to deny. He sits for 30 minutes, his mind racing, feeling disoriented, and his stomach growling. He grabs a lemon-lime soda from the kitchen. Feeling an internal heat, he retreats to the bathroom, washing his face with cold water to compose himself. Then, he notices the wet shower floor, confirming his worst fears. He sits on the edge of the bed, dazed, suddenly struck by the full horror of the situation. Divorce appears inevitable, but the thought of telling Grace is agonizing. Hank sat in the Impala, the engine off, the air thick and still. The flat tire was a distant, irrelevant problem now. The garage door remained stubbornly closed, a beige rectangle against the familiar brick of his own home. He checked his watch. Half an hour had passed since Dale's black truck had disappeared inside. His mind felt like a clogged drain, thoughts swirling but refusing to go anywhere specific. A dull ache had started behind his eyes. Another 90 minutes bled away, marked only by the shifting light and the slow throb in his temples. Then, the garage door rumbled open again. Dale's truck backed out, its massive tires crunching on the gravel drive. Sarah was in the passenger seat, turning to say something to Dale as he backed out. They didn't look his way, didn't see him hunched low in his car. His face turned away, The truck paused at the end of the driveway, then accelerated, disappearing down the street. The garage door closed once more, leaving the house silent. He checked his watch again. 2:30 p.m. Sarah usually got home around 5. A slow, sickening realization dawned. This wasn't a quick stop after work. This was something else entirely. His stomach twisted. He had to go inside. He had to know. The compulsion was overwhelming. A grim curiosity demanding answers. A new worry surfaced. Grace. He had to pick her up from school at 4 p.m. What would he tell her? How would he look her in the eye? The thought was a sharp, cold jab to his gut. He couldn't process it now. First, the house. He drove the Impala the short distance, pulling into the driveway as if he were just arriving home. He fumbled with his keys, the metal cold against his palm. The front door opened into a silence that was almost tangible. No television, no radio, no familiar sounds of Sarah moving about, only the faint, steady drip of the kitchen faucet and the hushed hum of the air vents. The silence felt wrong, heavy, like a shroud. He walked through the living room, past the unused fireplace, into the kitchen. Everything appeared normal. A half-eaten bowl of cereal sat on the counter, leftover from Grace's breakfast. The coffee pot was off, empty. No strange objects, no misplaced items. He checked the downstairs bathroom, the small coat closet. Nothing. The quiet persisted, almost mocking him. He moved to the stairs, his footsteps muffled on the carpeted treads. Each step felt heavy, dragging. The house felt colder upstairs, a chill that had nothing to do with the thermostat. He pushed open the master bedroom door. The room was neat, the way Sarah always kept it. A faint, unfamiliar scent hung in the air, a sweetness he couldn't place. Then his eyes fell on the bed, the sheets. They were clean, pristine, freshly made, not the ones he'd woken up on this morning. The floral pattern was different. A crushing weight settled on his chest. He knew Sarah's routine. She changed the sheets every Saturday, sometimes Sunday, not on a Tuesday afternoon. Never. The explanation hit him then. A brutal, undeniable force. He slid down the wall, his back scraping against the plaster, until he was sitting on the floor, his knees drawn up, his head heavy in his hands. He felt numb, completely hollowed out. The truth was too clear, too stark to deny. He sat there for a long time, maybe 30 minutes, maybe more. His mind raced, replaying scenes, fragments of conversations, every casual touch, every late night at the office. Had it been going on for months, years? He felt drugged, disconnected from his own body. His stomach growled, a faint, embarrassing sound in the quiet room. He pushed himself up, his legs stiff. He needed something. He went back downstairs, the silent house feeling even larger now. In the kitchen, he opened the refrigerator and grabbed a cold can of lemon-lime soda. He popped the top, the fizz a surprisingly loud sound. His skin felt hot and clammy, a strange mix of sweat and cold. He walked back upstairs, not to the bedroom, but to the master bathroom. He turned on the cold water, splashing it repeatedly on his face, trying to clear the fog, to bring himself back to himself. The water was icy, stinging his skin. He looked at his reflection in the mirror, a stranger with wide, bloodshot eyes staring back. As he reached for a towel, he saw it. The shower floor. It was wet, not soaking, not puddles, but a fine, shimmering dampness on the white tiles, the kind that came from recent use. The plastic shower curtain was slightly askew. It confirmed everything, every dark, unspoken fear he'd harbored in the last hour. He walked back into the bedroom, the soda still cold in his hand. He sat on the edge of the freshly made bed, the unfamiliar fabric rough against his skin. He felt dazed, as if he'd been hit by something he hadn't seen coming. Then, the full horror of the scene, of what had just happened in his own bed, in his own home, washed over him. The world tilted. Divorce. The word echoed in his mind, sharp and final. But Grace? How would he tell Grace? The thought was a fresh stab of pain, even deeper than the first. Hank stumbles to his car, feeling a profound exhaustion, his head throbbing. He acknowledges he's unfit to drive, but knows Grace, his daughter, is waiting. He pulls into the school car line, spotting Grace by the entrance, a painful sight. Grace, with her mother's dark hair and hazel eyes, approaches the car. She throws her backpack in the back and starts to kiss him, but then stops. "Dad, what's wrong?" she asks, her face full of concern. "Are you sick? Is Mom okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," he says, his voice unsteady. "No one's hurt, but I need to talk." He suggests they go to the park, just to talk and for him to hold her. "Okay, Dad. But you're scaring me," Grace responds, her vulnerability evident. "I know, sweetheart, but it's going to be okay," he tells her, hoping it's true. They arrive at the park, a place filled with memories of past happiness. He questions if those happy days are now gone, his life reduced to past joys. They walk to a bench, Grace taking his hand, swinging their arms as she did as a child. Hank struggles to find the right words, feeling the heavy burden of his impending confession. He stumbled out of the house, the afternoon sun a harsh glare after the dim, quiet rooms. His head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, as if he'd been on a 10-day bender, though he hadn't touched a drop. Every muscle felt heavy, every thought a struggle. He knew he wasn't fit to drive. Not like this. But the clock kept ticking. Grace, his baby girl. She would be waiting. He pulled the Impala into the long, slow-moving line of cars outside Grace's school. The building was a familiar blur of brick and glass. He scanned the clusters of children by the main entrance. There she was, small against the imposing double doors, her bright pink backpack a splash of color. A beautiful sight, but it twisted something deep inside him, a sharp, aching pain. Grace had Sarah's dark, almost black hair, and her unique hazel eyes, flecked with gold and green. She started walking toward the car, a bounce in her step. Unaware, he watched her approach, a knot tightening in his chest. She pulled open the back door, tossed her backpack onto the seat, then came around to the passenger side. She leaned in, a small smile on her face, ready for her usual kiss on the cheek, but then she stopped, mid-motion. Her eyes, those beautiful, intelligent eyes, scanned his face. Her brow furrowed, the smile vanished. "Dad, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice small, tentative. "Are you sick? You look different." Her gaze sharpened. "Is Mom okay?" The questions came out in a rush, a rising tide of worry and fear. Her escalating concern forced him to speak, to pull himself together. "I'm fine, sweetheart," he managed, his voice sounding shaky, even to his own ears. He took a breath. "No one's hurt or sick, Grace. Everything's physically fine. But I need to talk to you. We need to talk." Grace looked at him, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Talk about what?" He searched for the right words, something that wouldn't shatter her world immediately. "How about we go to the park?" he suggested, trying for a normal tone. "Just for a few minutes. We can talk there. And I want to hold you for a minute." She hesitated, her gaze still fixed on his face, trying to read the unreadable. "Okay, Dad," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "But you're scaring me." Her innocence, so pure and vulnerable, was like a physical blow. "I know, sweetheart," he told her, reaching out to squeeze her small hand. "I know. But it's going to be okay. I promise." He hoped it wasn't a lie, hoped he wasn't promising something he couldn't deliver. He drove the short distance to the community park, a place filled with countless happy memories. He remembered pushing Grace on the swings, her small legs kicking higher and higher, her laughter echoing in the spring air. He'd helped her build sandcastles in the sandbox, scraped knees on the slides. The park was a testament to their life, to the easy joy they had shared. Now, he wondered if those days were just memories, if his life had become nothing but a collection of past joys, locked away behind a sudden, impenetrable wall. They walked toward their favorite bench, beneath the sprawling branches of an old oak tree. Grace took his hand, her small fingers warm and trusting in his. She swung their arms back and forth, just like she used to when she was little, a comforting, familiar gesture. Hank felt the weight of the confession he was about to make. The words felt like stones in his throat, heavy and sharp, threatening to tear him apart before he even uttered them. He had to find them, though. For Grace. He just had to. "Just tell me, Dad," Grace says, squeezing his hand. "I can handle it." "Well, I'm not sure I can," Hank replies, and then his composure breaks. He recounts everything. What he witnessed, his feelings, the overwhelming betrayal. Tears stream down his face, silent and heavy, as Grace listens intently, holding his hand. When he finishes, Grace embraces him tightly, offering comfort. "Oh, Dad," Grace whispers, her voice thick. "I'm so sorry." "What are we going to do?" Hank takes a deep breath, trying to regain control. "I don't know yet. But we'll figure it out." He asks her if she feels ready to go home and confront her mother. Grace nods with determination. "Yes, I am. Let's go." They walk back to the car. Grace insists on driving, handling the vehicle carefully. Upon their arrival, Sarah's car is indeed in the garage. Sarah greets them at the door with hugs, acting as if everything is normal. "How about takeout tonight?" Sarah cheerfully suggests. "My treat. I think we need to talk to you for a minute, Mom," Grace says, her voice steady and cold. Sarah's smile falters, a touch of concern entering her tone. "Is everything all right, baby?" They sat on the park bench, the setting sun casting long shadows across the grass. Grace turned to him, her eyes wide and earnest. "Just tell me, Dad," she said, squeezing his hand. Her grip was surprisingly firm. "I can handle it." He swallowed hard, the words catching in his throat. "Well, I'm not sure I can," he replied. And then the dam broke. The carefully constructed wall he'd built around the truth crumbled. The story spilled out, raw and unedited. He told her about the flat tire, about pulling into the Kroger parking lot, about seeing Dale Peterson's black truck. He described Sarah stepping out, laughing, holding Dale's hand. He spoke of the shock, the numb disbelief, watching them disappear into the store, then reappear. And the drive home, the slow, agonizing realization as they pulled into their own driveway, the garage door closing behind them. He even told her about the freshly changed sheets, the wet shower floor. As he spoke, tears streamed down his face, silent and heavy, tracing cold paths through the dust and grime of his long day. He didn't try to stop them. They felt like a cleansing, a release of the poison that had been building inside him. Grace didn't interrupt. She just sat there, holding his hand tighter and tighter, listening to every broken word. When he finally finished, his voice hoarse, his chest aching, Grace didn't say anything for a moment. She just leaned over and wrapped her arms around him, holding him with a fierce tenderness that surprised him. Her small body felt solid against his. "Oh, Dad," Grace whispered, her voice thick with emotion, muffled against his shoulder. "I'm so sorry. What are we going to do?" He took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to compose himself, trying to pull back from the edge. "I don't know yet, sweetheart," he managed, his voice still ragged, "but we'll figure it out." "We will." He pulled back slightly, looking into her face. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her jaw was set. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Ready to go home?" "Ready to talk to your mom?" Grace didn't hesitate. She looked him straight in the eye, a glint of determination there. "Yes, I am," she said, her voice steady now, resolute. "Let's go." They stood up and walked back to the Impala. The world felt different, sharper, as if a filter had been removed. As they approached the car, Grace paused. "Dad," she said, "can I drive?" He looked at her, surprised. She had her permit, had been practicing for a few months, mostly in empty parking lots. "Grace, are you sure?" "Yes," she said, her gaze firm. He handed her the keys, a silent gesture of trust. She got into the driver's seat, adjusted the mirrors with a careful hand, and started the engine. She handled the Impala with a surprising steadiness, pulling out of the parking lot and onto the street. Her focus absolute. He watched her, this young woman, suddenly grown up, navigating the world with a quiet resolve he hadn't known she possessed. As they turned onto their street, He saw it. Sarah's beige sedan was parked in the garage, the door open this time, a beacon of her presence. His stomach clenched. Grace pulled the Impala into the driveway, killed the engine, and took a deep breath. Sarah met them at the front door, a bright smile on her face. She stepped forward, ready to envelop them in her usual after-school hugs and kisses, acting completely normal, as if the day had been nothing but routine. It was a performance, polished and practiced. "Hey, my two favorites," she chirped, her voice light. "How were your days?" She reached for Grace first, then turned to him. "How about takeout tonight?" Sarah suggested, her tone cheerful, oblivious to the storm that was about to break. "My treat. I'm thinking Chinese? Or maybe pizza?" Grace stepped back from her mother's embrace. Her face was calm, almost unnervingly so. "I think we need to talk to you for a minute, Mom," she said, her voice steady, but with an underlying coldness that made Hank wince. Sarah's smile faltered, just slightly. A tiny crack in the facade. She looked from Grace to Hank, a hint of concern creeping into her voice. "Is everything all right, baby?" she asked Grace, her eyes searching. The question hung in the air, thick with unspoken tension. "I don't know," Grace replies, her gaze fixed on her mother. "Let's find out." They move inside, Hank positioning himself beside Grace on the couch, presenting a united front. Sarah remains standing, her eyes nervously scanning between them, sensing the palpable tension. "What's going on?" she asks, her voice slightly trembling, her cheerful demeanor fracturing. Hank looks at her, a complex mix of anger and sorrow in his eyes. "Why don't you tell us, Sarah? Where were you this afternoon?" Sarah's face pales, and she stammers, I was at work. Why?" "What's this about? Stop lying, Mom." Grace interjects, her voice sharp and accusatory. "Dad saw you with that guy, Dale, at our house," Grace declares, sealing Sarah's fate. Sarah's entire facade crumbles. She collapses into a nearby chair, burying her face in her hands. I can explain," she stammers, her voice weak with defeat and shame. "Go ahead," Hank says, his voice flat, devoid of any discernible emotion. "We're listening." Sarah takes a shaky breath, finally confessing. I've been seeing Dale for a few months now. I didn't mean for it to happen, but we fell in love. I was going to tell you both. I swear. I didn't know how." Grace stands up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly across the floor. "How could you do this to us? To Dad? I hate you." She storms upstairs, the resounding slam of her bedroom door echoing through the silent house. Grace didn't waver. Her hazel eyes, so much like her mother's, were locked on Sarah. "I don't know," she replied, her voice steady and clear. "Let's find out." They walked into the living room, the familiar space now charged with an unbearable tension. Hank sat on the edge of the couch, Grace settling in beside him, her presence a silent, unwavering force. They sat as one, a united front, against an unspoken accusation. Sarah remained standing, her shoulders stiff. Her eyes darted between them, a frantic dance, sensing the shift in the air, the heavy weight of what was coming. The forced cheerfulness had evaporated, replaced by a growing unease. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, the cheerful mask beginning to crack around the edges. Her hands fidgeted at her sides. Hank looked at her then, a bitter mix of anger and sadness swirling inside him. The words came out flat, cold. "Why don't you tell us, Sarah? Where were you this afternoon?" Sarah's face blanched. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin pale and waxy. She stammered, I was at work. Why? What's this about? Hank, what are you implying?" Her voice rose slightly, a feigned indignation, but it was weak. "Stop lying, Mom," Grace interjected, her voice sharp, cutting through the thin veneer of Sarah's denial. There was no mistaking the anger, the raw hurt in her tone. It was unforgiving. Sarah recoiled, her gaze flicking to Grace, then back to Hank. Her eyes widened, a flicker of panic. "Dad saw you with that guy, Dale, at our house," Grace declared, the words hanging in the air like an executioner's pronouncement. It was over. The game was up. Sarah's fate was sealed. Sarah's entire facade crumpled then, a slow, agonizing collapse. The defiance drained from her, leaving her suddenly small and fragile. She sank into a nearby armchair, her body slumping. Her hands rose, covering her face, burying herself in shame. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. I can explain, she stammered, her voice muffled, weak with defeat. The words were barely audible. Go ahead, Hank said, his voice flat, devoid of any discernible emotion. He felt nothing, just a vast emptiness. We're listening. Sarah took a shaky, ragged breath, her hands still covering her face. When she finally spoke, the words were a confession. Forced and painful. I've been seeing Dale for a few months now. She paused, her voice cracking. I didn't mean for it to happen, Hank. I really didn't. But we fell in love. I was going to tell you both. I swear. I didn't know how. Grace shot up from the couch, her chair scraping loudly across the hardwood floor, a harsh sound in the quiet room. Her face was contorted, a mix of hurt and fury. How could you do this to us? She cried, her voice trembling with the force of her emotion. To Dad? I hate you. The words hung in the air. A devastating blow. Grace turned and stormed out of the living room, her footsteps heavy on the stairs. They heard the muffled thud, then the resounding slam of her bedroom door upstairs. A sound that echoed through the silent house, leaving behind only the profound silence and the heavy weight of what had just been said. This is a crossroads moment, isn't it? A single choice can unravel a lifetime. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. Hank remains seated, staring at Sarah, his wife of 20 years. So, what now? He asks, his voice devoid of emotion. Sarah looks at him, tears welling in her eyes. I want to divorce Hank, she says, her words a profound new wound. Dale and we want to be together. He's leaving his wife too. I'm so sorry, she adds. I never meant to hurt you or Grace. A wave of bitter anger washes over Hank. You never meant to hurt us? That's rich, Sarah. What did you think would happen when you decided to have an affair? Did you think we'd just accept it? Sarah flinches. I don't know what I thought. I just know that I'm not happy anymore, Hank. Dale understands me in a way you never have. She continues, attempting to justify her actions. Hank lets out a short, bitter laugh. Oh, I'm sure he does, and I'm sure his wife feels the same about you. Have you considered Grace? Or were you too preoccupied with your future? Sarah shrinks back, offering no genuine response, only more tears. Hank feels a chilling realization. Her decision was made long before this day. He slowly stands, feeling an immense weight, and walks away from her. The silence after Grace's outburst and Sarah's confession is heavier than any scream. Hank understands this is merely the start of a long, agonizing journey. Hank remained seated on the couch, the denim of his jeans rough against his skin. He stared at Sarah, hunched in the armchair, her face still buried in her hands. The woman who had shared his life for 2 decades, whose dreams had intertwined with his, whose laughter had filled their home. Now, she was a stranger, broken and weeping. So, what now? He asked, his voice hollow, devoid of any inflection. Sarah slowly lifted her head, her eyes red and swollen, tears still streaming down her cheeks. I want a divorce, Hank, she said, the words a fresh wound, carving themselves into the quiet air. Dale and we want to be together. He's leaving his wife too. Her gaze dropped, unable to meet his. I'm so sorry, she added, her voice barely a whisper. I never meant to hurt you or Grace. A surge of bitter anger, hot and sharp, coursed through Hank's veins. It was a cold, cutting anger, not loud, but deeply resonant. You never meant to hurt us? He repeated, his voice dangerously low. That's rich, Sarah. That's really rich. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. What did you think would happen when you decided to have an affair? When you brought him into our house? Into our bed? Did you think we'd just accept it and move on? Did you think Grace and I would just pack our bags and wish you well? Sarah flinched at his words, as if struck. I don't know what I thought, she stammered, wringing her hands together. I just know that I'm not happy anymore, Hank. I haven't been happy for a long time. She looked up, a desperate plea in her eyes. Dale understands me in a way you never have, she continued, seeking some form of justification, some validation for her betrayal. Hank let out a short, harsh laugh, a sound devoid of humor. Oh, I'm sure he does, he said, the sarcasm thick. And I'm sure his wife feels the same way about you. I bet she thinks you're a real catch, too. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Have you thought about any of this, Sarah? Have you thought about how this will affect Grace? How she's going to deal with this? Or were you too busy planning your future, your happy future with Dale? Sarah shrunk back, unable to meet his gaze. She offered no real answer, just more tears, more silent weeping. The tears, once an appeal for sympathy, now felt like an evasion, a refusal to take responsibility. A chilling realization settled over Hank. It wasn't about the confession, or even the fight. Her choice had been made long ago. The affair wasn't a mistake. It was a decision, a carefully plotted course. This conversation was just the formal announcement of a fate already sealed. He was an afterthought, an obstacle to be overcome. He stood up slowly, the movement feeling impossibly heavy, as if the weight of the world had suddenly settled on his shoulders. The room felt suffocating. He turned, not looking back at her, and walked away. He left her in the living room, alone with her tears and her confession. The silence that followed Grace's outburst and Sarah's declaration was heavier than any scream, deeper than any shout. It was the silence of something irrevocably broken. Hank knew this was only the beginning. A long, painful road stretched out before them, and he was already tired. Days turn into weeks. Hank seeks out an old friend, Jim Nelson, a small-town lawyer, to discuss the divorce. Jim outlines the challenging path ahead: child custody battles, asset division, and the lengthy legal process. Sarah, represented by an aggressive city lawyer, pushes for what she believes is her due. The financial strain becomes apparent on Hank. His modest earnings stretch thin. Grace, quiet and withdrawn, struggles at school, her once excellent grades starting to decline. Hank tries to shield her from the conflict, but the tension in the house is palpable. He has an unexpected and tense encounter with Sarah and Dale at the grocery store, marked by awkward silence. Dale offers a patronizing nod. Hank ignores him, focused on protecting Grace. Hank feels isolated, facing judgment from some and pity from others in their small community. He takes on extra work shifts, finding a strange comfort in the physical exhaustion. The house feels vast and empty without Sarah, yet also liberated from the former deception. Grace begins to lash out, questioning Sarah's departure, sometimes even blaming Hank. Hank realizes he can't simply fix the situation. He must heal himself and help Grace heal. He starts attending a small support group for divorced men, finding a rare sense of understanding. The first legal papers arrive, formally ending his marriage, a cold and final confirmation. Days bled into weeks. The initial shock had given way to a dull, persistent ache. Hank reached out to Jim Nelson, an old friend from high school who'd become a small-town lawyer. They met in Jim's modest office, filled with stacks of legal briefs and the scent of old paper. Jim, with his worn suit and tired eyes, laid out the grim reality of the road ahead. Child custody agreements, the painstaking division of assets, the slow, grinding process of a divorce. It would be long, messy, and expensive. Sarah, true to form, had hired a more aggressive lawyer from the city, a sharp woman known for her no-nonsense approach. Hank received Jim's updates, always with a fresh demand from Sarah's side, pushing for more than Hank believed was fair, or even possible. The financial strain began to show almost immediately. His modest earnings, once enough for their family, were now stretched thin, barely covering the mounting legal fees and the new, uncertain future. Grace, once so vibrant, had become quiet, withdrawn. Her once bright grades, a source of pride, started to slip. Her teachers called, concerned about her lack of focus. Hank tried to shield her from the adult ugliness, the cold legal language, the bitterness that coated their every interaction. But the tension was thick in the air, an invisible, suffocating blanket that permeated every corner of their home. One Saturday afternoon, Hank found himself pushing a cart through the grocery store, Grace walking silently beside him. He turned down an aisle and froze. Sarah and Dale, they stood by the frozen foods, laughing, their heads close together. The air crackled with an immediate, oppressive silence. Sarah's eyes widened. A flicker of surprise. Then something unreadable. Dale, however, offered Hank a patronizing nod, a slight, almost imperceptible tilt of his head, a gesture of knowing superiority. Hank ignored him, his gaze fixed on Grace, whose small hand had tightened in his. He guided her past them, his focus on protecting her from the silent confrontation. He felt the isolation acutely in their small community. Some people offered pity, their eyes filled with a sad understanding. Others offered judgment, their whispers following him through the hardware store or at the gas station. He tried not to dwell on it, tried to keep his head down. He started working extra shifts, volunteering for any route, any additional call. The physical exhaustion became a strange kind of solace, a way to numb the constant thrum of anxiety. He would come home, bone-weary, and collapse into bed, finding a brief, dreamless sleep. The house, once bustling with the sounds of family life, now felt vast and empty without Sarah. Yet, paradoxically, it also felt free from the suffocating deception that had permeated its walls. He could breathe easier, even in the loneliness. Grace, however, wasn't letting him off easy. She started pushing back. Small, sharp questions about why Sarah had left, why things were the way they were. Sometimes, in her anger and confusion, she even blamed Hank. "Why didn't you make her happy, Dad?" she'd asked one night, her voice filled with a child's bewildered pain. The questions cut him deeper than any legal document. He realized then that he couldn't just fix this. There was no quick solution. He needed to heal himself, and he needed to help Grace heal too. It was a long road. He found a small support group for divorced men, meeting in the basement of a church on Thursday nights. In that dimly lit room, among other broken men, he found a sliver of understanding, a shared burden that eased the weight, if only for an hour. Then the first legal papers arrived, delivered by a solemn courier. The thick envelope, official and impersonal, contained the formal petition for divorce, outlining Sarah's demands, officializing the end of his marriage. It was a final, cold confirmation, stark and undeniable. Grace's anger deepens, manifesting in late nights, new friends, and a growing distance from Hank. She begins skipping classes and getting into minor trouble, a clear cry for attention. Sarah attempts to establish a visitation routine, but Grace frequently refuses to go, still resentful. Hank worries constantly, feeling helpless against Grace's rebellious streak and fearing for her future. His own loneliness is a constant companion, battling bouts of anger and profound sadness. His sister, Martha, calls often, offering advice, some helpful, some merely small-town gossip. Hank knows he must rise above his own pain to support Grace and forgive himself. A heated argument erupts between Hank and Grace regarding Sarah's choices, ending with Grace storming off. That night, Hank finds Grace crying in her room, finally admitting her pain and confusion. Hank gently suggests therapy for Grace, and for himself, recognizing they need help. News trickles in. Dale's wife, Brenda, has filed for divorce, her life also devastated. Dale and Sarah's relationship, founded on betrayal, appears to be struggling under external pressures. Hank starts seeing Sarah more often, her confident demeanor replaced by weariness and a hollow look. He feels a strange mix of vindication and a persistent ache, understanding the cost of her decisions. Grace, slowly and tentatively, begins to open up, offering a small sign of hope amidst the chaos. Grace's anger deepened. A slow, festering wound that changed her. Late nights, hushed phone calls, a new circle of friends with sharper edges, the distance between them grew. A chasm Hank didn't know how to bridge. She started skipping classes, small acts of defiance that escalated into calls from the principal. Minor trouble, a clear cry for attention, a beacon flashing red in the dark. Sarah tried to establish a new visitation routine, mandated by the provisional divorce agreement, but Grace often refused to go, still harboring a deep, simmering resentment that fueled her rebellion. She made her bed, "Dad," Grace would say, her voice cold, hard. Let her lie in it. Hank worried constantly, a knot of anxiety permanently lodged in his gut. He felt helpless against Grace's rebellious streak, fearing for her future, for the kind of woman she was becoming under the shadow of this betrayal. His own loneliness was a constant companion, an empty chair at the dinner table, a quiet house after Grace went to bed. He battled bouts of sudden, sharp anger, followed by profound, consuming sadness. His sister, Martha, called frequently. Her advice, sometimes helpful, sometimes just echoing the small-town gossip, was a mixed blessing. "She's just acting out, Hank," Martha would say, her voice tinged with concern. "You just gotta be there for her." But being there felt like standing on shifting sand. Hank knew he needed to rise above his own pain, to set aside the resentment and the hurt, if he was truly going to be there for Grace. He needed to forgive himself for what he couldn't control, for the choices Sarah had made, choices that had ripped their world apart. One evening, a heated argument erupted. It started over a missed curfew, but quickly spiraled. "Why are you so mad at me?" Grace shouted, her voice raw. "Why don't you ever say anything to Mom? Your mother made her choices." "Grace," Hank countered, his own voice tight with frustration. "I can't control her. I can only control myself, but you let her get away with it," Grace accused, tears welling in her eyes. "You just let her leave." She stormed off, the familiar thud of her bedroom door slamming, echoing through the house. That night, hours later, Hank found Grace crying in her room, curled up on her bed, her face buried in her pillow. He sat beside her, gently placing a hand on her back. "I miss her, Dad," she choked out, her voice muffled. "I don't understand why she did it. I don't understand anything anymore." The admission, raw and painful, was a crack in her hardened shell. Hank gently suggested therapy. For Grace. For both of them. He admitted, in a quiet voice, that they couldn't do it alone. The idea hung in the air. A possibility. A fragile thread of hope. News trickled in through Martha, through Jim, through the grapevine of their small town. Dale's wife, Brenda, had filed for divorce. Her life, too, had been upended, shattered by the same betrayal. Dale and Sarah's new relationship, built on the shifting sands of infidelity, seemed to be struggling under the weight of expectations and public opinion. Small towns had long memories. Hank started seeing Sarah more often, at court hearings, at school events for Grace. Her confident stride had been replaced by a weary posture. Her once bright eyes now held a certain hollow look. The easy laughter was gone. He felt a strange mix of vindication and a persistent, dull ache. He knew the cost of her choices, a cost she was now beginning to pay. Slowly, tentatively, Grace began to open up. Small conversations, lingering hugs, a willingness to talk about her feelings. It was a fragile beginning, a small sign of hope in the storm. But it was there. The divorce decree arrives, finalized, closing a significant chapter. Hank and Grace begin to settle into their new normal. A two-person household. Grace starts counseling, slowly processing her anger and sadness, reconnecting with old friends. She discovers a new interest in photography, a creative outlet for her complex emotions. Hank reflects on human resilience and the enduring strength of his bond with Grace. He has a chance encounter with Sarah and Dale at a town festival. They appear strained and distant. Hank realizes his burning anger has faded, replaced by quiet acceptance and a resolve to move forward. Grace, observing her mother from afar, doesn't forgive, but understands that life continues. Hank cautiously considers the possibility of a new relationship, approaching it with newfound wisdom. He knows the scars will always remain. A reminder of the fragility of trust and moral consequences. The small town never truly forgets, but Hank and Grace learn to live with the whispers. They discover unexpected moments of joy, building a future together, one day at a time. The steady, unyielding Midwestern landscape mirrors their quiet endurance. Hank finally understands that paying the price involves more than just financial loss. The thick envelope arrived one Tuesday, not by courier this time, but by regular mail. Hank recognized Jim Nelson's firm logo. Inside, the divorce decree. Finalized. It was over. The official end to a chapter that had consumed almost 2 decades of his life. He read the legal jargon, each clause a cold testament to what had been lost, what had been divided. It felt less like a celebration, and more like the sober turning of a page. Hank and Grace slowly, tentatively, settled into their new normal. The house, once full of 3 lives, now hummed with the quieter rhythm of 2. Dinners were simpler, routines more flexible. There was a quiet understanding between them. An unspoken pact to navigate this altered landscape together. Grace started counseling, just as Hank had suggested. She went twice a week, initially withdrawn. But slowly, over time, she began to find her voice. She found healthier ways to process the anger and sadness that had coiled inside her. Old friendships, neglected during her rebellious phase, began to rekindle. She started to laugh again, a sound that brought a warmth back into the house. One afternoon, she came home from school buzzing with an idea. She'd joined the photography club. Her camera, a gift from Hank years ago that had mostly sat unused, became an extension of her. She'd disappear for hours, returning with memory cards full of abstract shots, close-ups of nature, capturing the world through a new lens, a creative outlet for her complex emotions. Hank saw the beauty in her work, a resilience he admired. He often found himself reflecting on the sheer resilience of the human spirit, especially Grace's. The enduring strength of their bond, forged in the crucible of betrayal and loss, felt like the strongest thing he knew. A few months after the divorce was finalized, Hank and Grace went to the annual town festival. The air was thick with the smell of popcorn and diesel from the fair rides. He saw them then, Sarah and Dale. They stood by the Ferris wheel, their backs to him. Dale was talking, but Sarah's shoulders were hunched, her gaze distant. She looked tired, a weary posture replacing her once confident stride. Their closeness seemed strained, a forced proximity. Hank felt a strange detachment. The burning anger had faded, replaced by a quiet sense of acceptance and a resolve to simply move forward. Grace saw them too. She didn't say anything, just squeezed Hank's hand, her own grip firm. She looked at her mother from afar, a long, assessing gaze. He saw no forgiveness in her eyes, but a quiet understanding that life moved on. With or without it. He occasionally found himself thinking about the possibility of a new relationship, a new beginning. He'd seen a woman at the grocery store a few times, a cashier with kind eyes and a ready smile. He hadn't approached her yet. He knew he would, eventually, but with a wisdom gained at a heavy price. This time, he'd move cautiously, aware of the deeper currents of trust and expectation. He knew the scars would always be there, etched into his heart, a stark reminder of the fragility of trust and the deep moral consequences of betrayal. The small town never truly forgot. Either, the whispers still lingered, sometimes, but Hank and Grace learned to live with them, learned to filter out the noise, to find moments of unexpected joy in their quieter, simpler life. They built a future together, one day at a time, each new sunrise a fresh chance. The steady, unyielding Midwestern landscape, stretching out under wide, indifferent skies, mirrored their quiet endurance, their slow but determined path forward. Hank finally understood that paying the price wasn't just about the financial loss, the division of property. It was about the erosion of a reputation, the tearing of a family, the shattering of love, and the painful reconstruction of self. A quiet hope began to settle over their home, fragile but persistent. The house, once a silent tomb of deception, now echoed with Grace's laughter and the gentle hum of their shared life. Hank knew some things could never be fully mended, that the cracks would always be visible, but they were learning to live around them, to build something new in their place. They had survived. They were healing, slowly, deliberately, proving that even after profound loss, life finds a way to grow, not despite the scars, but with them. The future remained unwritten, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like it truly belonged to them, a testament to resilience found in the ordinary rhythms of a Midwestern life. The divorce decree had arrived, a finality that settled over the house. Hank and Grace found a new rhythm, the quiet routines of two people adjusting to a changed world. Grace continued her counseling, the sharp edges of her anger slowly rounding, making room for a fragile understanding. Her photography, a new passion, offered an outlet for the complex emotions that still lingered. Hank watched her, recognizing the quiet resilience that had become their shared bedrock. He'd seen Sarah and Dale at the festival, their faces etched with a weariness that spoke of unseen burdens. The sight brought no surge of old anger, only a detached observation. He understood then that true healing was not about forgetting, but about moving forward with the scars. Grace, too, seemed to grasp this, observing her mother from a distance, recognizing life's forward march without necessarily offering forgiveness.